Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be replacing the hydraulic brake booster in my 100 series Land Cruiser. This job is something that I'm doing to fix a brake issue that started a few weeks ago. I was driving down the highway and all of a sudden sort of got a really loud buzzer and an ABS warning light came on the left side of the dash. So I pulled over, and shortly thereafter I lost all pressure to the braking system. And I will say that this car has 300,000 miles on it. It's 20 years old. Not once has it ever let me down or failed. It started every time for 20 years. I don't think it's ever had any failures, outside of the normal maintenance schedule, aside from this. But that said, it's kind of a common wear item on this Land Cruiser and some early 2000s Toyotas. There's a little motor in that brake booster that can wear out. There's other components like an accumulator that sometimes they'll lose their seal and not be able to hold pressure in the braking system. And then there's also a master cylinder, which again has some seals in it that can wear out. So the first part of this video is actually going to be troubleshooting. If you find yourself in the same position I was in with this loud buzzer and loss of pressure to the system, how can you troubleshoot to find out which component of that brake booster unit is actually causing the issue, right? And that might be something you want to figure out if you want to replace the individual part as opposed to the whole unit. Now, the downside to doing that is that Toyota doesn't sell any of the individual components of this brake booster system. So you have to go aftermarket. And then of course there's questions on how long are those aftermarket parts going to last. The advantage is that it's much cheaper. For example, you could replace the motor that pressurizes the system for only $100, whereas the entire unit that Toyota sells is about $1,300. You can buy that from a Toyota dealer or online as an OEM part. For me, I've been working, really hard to restore this car. I love it. I want to drive it for another 20 years. So, I was able to figure out that it was the motor that was broken for me. It wasn't pressurizing the system any longer, but I didn't want to replace it and then have something else on it break. I just decided to buy a whole new unit with the expectation that it should last for another, hopefully 300,000 miles in 20 years. So consider that. I will go ahead and include just a timestamp that you can skip to if you want to skip the troubleshooting portion of the video. That'll jump you right to the portion of the video where I actually remove my old brake booster unit and install the new one. So last thing I want to say is that obviously dealing with the brakes, this can be a dangerous job, especially if you missteps or you don't know what you're doing. So I highly suggest that each of you follow the factory service manual. If you have any doubt, have a professional help you out. Like I actually mention later in the video that I had the Toyota dealership do a portion of this for me. I had them do the brake bleeding and the brake fluid flush, which is a necessary step anytime you remove or replace a brake system component. So keep that in mind, and otherwise hope you guys enjoy the video. All right, so here are the tools we'll need for the job today. We have metric sockets and wrenches, 2 different 3/8 drive socket wrenches, a universal joint, which will help us kind of get into some tight places under the dash, 12 millimeter deep well socket, a couple different extensions, and then we have this flange nut wrench, which we need a 10 millimeter flange nut wrench to remove the brake lines from the hydraulic brake booster. And the reason for that is that these have a little bit better grip on the bolt than like your typical box-ended wrench would. Those are bolts you really don't want to strip out. So I think it's worth buying one of these for this job. Then we also have the the unit, ABS unit or hydraulic brake booster, master cylinder. It has a bunch of different names and functions, but here's the part number. As I mentioned, I got mine new from Toyota. And just to walk through the function of this thing, obviously it has a reservoir for extra brake fluid, and then on the bottom it has an electric motor. So this motor drives a pump, which, you know, when you turn the car on, let's say the car's been sitting for a long time, there's no pressure in the system. You turn the car on, this electric motor will run for 30 or 40 seconds. It will draw fluid from the reservoir into the pump and pump it into this pressure tank, where essentially the pressure is stored. So it'll do that until enough pressure is contained in this canister, and then it'll stop. And you know, from there you can use your brakes. I think you can use your brakes about 30 or 40 times before the pressure is completely let out of this cylinder. So, you know, it actually will start back up and repressurize constantly as you're driving. And I think that's part of the, you know, the issue with these is that this motor ends up running so much on these units that it ends up failing. And these units are used in not just Land Cruisers, but a bunch of early 2000s Toyota trucks, like Tacomas and 4Runners, and they all have this common problem that this motor runs out. Sometimes it's because of high mileage. Other times it's because like some seals kind of break or leak pressure. And you can imagine if the pressure canister is leaking pressure, then that motor is going to be running constantly. Eventually it's gonna wear out. The other issue you see on these sometimes is on the master cylinder, which is on the back here. And you can imagine this sort of like a piston function. This connects to your brake pedal. So when you press the brake pedal, this piston goes in and out. And there's O-rings and seals in there that can become kind of degraded or lose their seal. So if you have like a spongy brake pedal or some other symptoms, it could be the master cylinder. And as I mentioned before, there's different ways you can refurbish yours. I chose to buy a whole new unit because I'm pretty sure it's my motor that's broken, but I didn't want to just replace the motor with something that I didn't know how long it would last, because it's an aftermarket part. And then on top of that, I have to worry about all these other seals that are 20 years old. So I want to have this car for another 20 years. I decided to go ahead and make the investment to buy a whole new unit. So I'm going to show you today how to install it. Well, first how to remove the old one and then how to install it. But before I do that, I want to just walk you through some steps you can take to troubleshoot your brake issue, such that you might be able to kind of narrow down what it is going on with this unit if you're having that ABS warning light or any other issues. All right, so I'm going to talk you through how I was able to identify that it was likely the electric motor in my unit that was broken. I was driving down the road, the highway actually, and I got a really loud buzzer and a bunch of lights come up on the dash. One of them was ABS. I think the stability control and the A-track were all lighting up, and I got this really loud buzzer warning, which is kind of a clear sign to pull over. And when I did pull over, I realized that by that time the brakes weren't working, in the sense that I could actually press the brakes and barely get it to stop, but my braking capacity was severely diminished, and this is because the system wasn't pressurized. So what really cued me off to it being the motor, though, was that I got it home, turned the car off, came back to it, started it another day, and the lights ran for a few minutes until the system actually repressurized itself, and then they all went off. So this sporadic kind of ability for the system to pressurize itself is an indication that that electric motor has some components that are worn out. And I can explain that a little bit better later. But if that weren't the case, if it were just the system not holding pressure, then there are a couple other tests you can do to see if maybe there's a fuse that needs to be fixed in the ABS system, or maybe there's actually a seal and the system's not holding pressure at all. So there's another test you can do, which I actually did and passed, to see if your system holds pressure when the engine or the motor is running sporadically. So I'm going to walk you through that in a second. So the first step to determine basically whether your system can hold pressure, right? Is it a issue with the seal or not, is to turn the car off. And you want to let all the pressure out of the system. So to do that, you're going to press the brake pedal down to the floor about 40 times. And when all the pressure is out, you'll feel the brake pedal actually sink a little bit further down than it was the other times. So after we've depressed the brake pedal 40 times, again with the car off by the way, so that nothing is working to repressurize, you can come over here and look at the brake fluid reservoir, and we can see it's almost at the max fill line there. So what we could do, and what's happened as all the brake fluid has left this pressure canister, it's flown back into the reservoir and kind of filled it up to a high level. So we can take a piece of tape and sort of mark that level, and then what we're going to do is we'll start the car. It will have that buzzer sound and the ABS warning light because it's saying, hey, my system has no pressure right now. But after 30-40 seconds of that motor running, if the motor's working, and again, if the motor's working sporadically, this may be a hit or miss, but what'll happen is it'll draw that brake fluid into the pressure reservoir, and you'll see, maybe about an inch lower levels. And once you've done that, then you can sort of sit on that, turn the car off, sit on that pressurized system, come back about a day later and see, is the system still pressurized? If there are no leaks in the system, then absolutely a day later you should still have the same level of brake fluid. If there are leaks, that brake fluid will come back up. So again, when I passed this test and my system was able to hold pressure for a day, I realized that it's probably not a fuse, it's probably not any kind of issue with a seal or anything. It's probably the engine. If you still have any doubt, or you really want to test to be sure, another way you could do it is to remove this clip, and this positive and negative actually go directly to the motor. So if you were to take a 12-volt source from your battery and just kind of connect it to those two terminals and listen for that motor to start or not start, right? Obviously, if it doesn't start when you have a direct hot connection, it's your motor. All right, so once you have, done your troubleshooting and you've decided, is it an issue with my electric motor, maybe the motor and the accumulator or the master cylinder or such, you decide what components of this you want to replace, or, maybe you want to replace the whole unit like I did. The next step is sort of prepare to remove the old master cylinder. Or brake booster. So to do that, we turn the car off, we depress the brake pedal 40 times to release all the pressure from the system. So we can see that fluid line is near the max fill over here. We're going to disconnect the negative terminal from the battery and disconnect these 5 clips. After we do that, we'll start to remove these 4 brake lines that go in, which I'll show you a better picture of that. I also have some kind of preparations to make sure that I don't get any brake fluid on the paint. I have a couple rags stuffed down there because the brake fluid is highly corrosive. If it gets on the paint, it'll definitely ruin it. So I want to take some preventative measures there. All right, so I have those steps done. When you're taking these clips off, you want to be really delicate. The plastic is obviously, on my car it's 20 years old, and you do not want to break these or ruin them anyway. So take those off carefully, and next step, as I mentioned, is to remove these 4 brake lines. So you have your 2 front brake lines there, and then the 2 rear ones are on the side here, right there and there. So this should be pretty straightforward. We have our 10mm flange wrench, and we're going to remove those one by one. And I have these plugs which came with the new unit that I'll be able to screw kind of into the master cylinder to keep the fluid from leaking out there. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything to plug up the brake lines, so I might use some tape. I want to avoid like jamming anything in there like paper towels, because you don't want any sorts of residue or anything else to get in the brake lines. Nothing but brake fluid should really be in there. You have some leaking out there. You really don't want to get this stuff in your skin either. All right, so we're just gonna move that out of the way. Take one of our plastic clips here, screw it in. And repeat that process 4 times. All right, so I have all 4 brake lines disconnected and just sort of out of the way there. There's also a couple clips you can disconnect the lines from to give you a little more room to play. You don't want to kink these or crease them in any way, obviously. And I also forgot to mention that if you have an earlier Land Cruiser, you may have like a big black box here. That's the charcoal canister. It has sort of a function of helping to capture fumes that aren't burned by the engine, or to recycle them. I don't have one, but if you do, it's pretty easy to remove. It's just a few bolts. You have, I think, 4 or 5 vacuum hoses that connect to it, so just make sure you take a picture of which hose goes to which connection. It has 1 electrical connector like that. Unhook all of that and remove it, because if you have a charcoal canister, you're going to have to move it out of the way, because the brake booster is going to come out sort of this way. So get that done if you need to. Now at this point, I have everything disconnected from the brake booster itself. We can go into the car under the dash on the driver's side and start to actually unbolt it from the firewall. So I want to use the new booster just to show you what those bolts are going to look like. These 4 bolts kind of protrude through the firewall under the driver's feet. We're going to have to remove a nut off of each of 4 of those. And then there's a little pin that goes through this and connects it to kind of the mechanism of the brake pedal. So we'll have to take that pin out, and it's going to be really hard for me to kind of show you on the camera. I'll do my best, but I'm going to remove those 4 bolts and that pin, and from there we should be able to take the brake booster out of the engine bay. One other thing I'll mention is that in the full service manual, if you're following that, it's actually going to have you remove this dash piece, which is a lot of work because you have a lot of electrical connectors for these buttons. You have some kind of heating and cooling ventilation that needs to be removed, and it's just kind of a mess of work, in my opinion. I think I can sort of snake my arms back there to get to the floorboard where those bolts are, and kind of set a wrench up to get those bolts off. So I'm going to try to do it without removing that dash panel. You're welcome to sort of follow that procedure if you'd like to, but I don't think it's necessary, and we should be able to get it out without it. I was pretty easily able to loosen the 2 bolts on the right. There's the upper right one right there. And I just want to show you how easy it is to reach in and remove this little cotter pin. Take that out, and then I'm going to have to reach my left hand in there to catch this pin, but I'm just going to push it through and catch it on the other side, and that should kind of disconnect the master cylinder from the brake assembly. All right, so there's the 4 bolts, the pin and the cotter pin. Definitely did not need to remove the dash to do that. It was not easy to get the upper left one. This is the setup that I use, kind of a long extension, and then the universal joint at the top. So the brake booster is totally unbolted. We should be able to lift it out of the engine bay now. All right, this is definitely not going to be easy. I really want to avoid catching any of these brake lines and bending them. And there's a lot of them. And this unit also weighs about 40 or 50 pounds, so it's not light. Let me just see if I can take a first shot at it and see what catches here. There, it comes out pretty nicely. Some brake lines there. There we go. Bolts are clear. And I think the way to do this is sort of to lift the front up. But for some reason, it's stuck. It's stuck on this brake line. Oh man, what's that? All right, I have eyes on all 4 brake lines. Just making sure they're not bending. Oh god, that's just heavy. Oh, I got one hooked on this red wire down here. There we go. Oh. All right, that looks good. All right, here so you can see the difference in the old unit and the new unit. They're identical, exactly the same. One thing I wanted to point out is that there's a gasket between the firewall and the unit that I'm actually going to reuse. I wish I would have bought a new one, but I didn't order it in time for the job, so I'm just going to reuse the old one, but I will include the part number to that gasket in the description. So obviously the next step is to put the new one in. I'm going to do that in exactly the reverse order. All right, that went in a lot easier than it was to get it out. So we can just leave it there and go thread the bolts on the inside. I was able to get the 4 mounting bolts in for this pretty easily actually, and the pin and the cotter pin as well. I think this set up with a couple different extensions and a universal joint worked really well. I would definitely say it's easier than removing the dash. I mean, this maybe took me 20 minutes. Not too bad. All right, so once we have all these connectors and brake lines set up, the next step is to fill the reservoir with some .3 brake fluid, and you just need a quart for this part. We'll need some more later when we go on to bleeding the brakes. But that quart gets you to just below the max fill line, and it's really important that you don't do anything, don't start the car without following the right procedures. So all I've done so far is filled the reservoir and connected the battery. I haven't turned the car on or anything like that. I'm going to include a link to the factory service manual in the description for this video. It's a Dropbox link, so you can go into, I think it's volume 2, go to the brake PDF, and scroll down a few pages till you see the procedure to bleed the brakes. And you'll notice that step A and B of that brake bleeding procedure refer to basically how to flush or prime the brake booster. So the first step with this new brake booster is going to be to mash the pedal 40 times, make sure all the pressure is removed from the system. Then we'll turn the key to the on position, so not starting the car, but just turning it on, and we'll come around and listen for how long that pump is running. We're hoping for anything between 30 and 40 seconds. If it keeps running, that means it's failing to pressurize the system in an appropriate amount of time, so we'll turn the car off, and we'll repeat steps A and B until it lands in between that 34-40 seconds range. It should just take one time. So I'll go ahead and do that step with you now. I think we should expect for the buzzer to come on and the ABS lights to come on as well. Let's see, just to the on position here. Yep, we got a buzzer and some lights. And that was, I can hear that pump running. And if you watch, you can see that fluid slowly coming out. Let's see how long it takes. "30 seconds. Okay, that's perfect. So we don't have to do anything different. This is the first step to the new master cylinder being installed. All right, so once you have those steps done, you can come in the cab and turn the car on. I'm letting it run for a minute just to make sure the battery stays charged. And step C in the factory service manual is to depress the brake pedal 20 times while the car is on or the power is on. And I think the point of that is to reset the onboard computer, so don't skip that step. And then steps D and E go on to refer you to how to manually bleed the front two and the rear two brake lines. And then it sort of goes on to describe a procedure where you re-bleed the front two brake lines with a Toyota Tech sort of service computer. And I think the point of that process is to make sure that all of the air is out of the ABS portion of the unit itself, so that when you have stability control or you have ABS kick into gear, that there's no air bubbles in that portion of the system. I've read all over the internet, and everyone has a different opinion about whether or not this needs to even be done. Or, you know, some people say you can, like, after you bleed the front and the back manually, go take it to like a gravel road where you would activate the ABS system, which may like pump any air that is in the system into the brake lines, and then you can re-bleed the brake lines. That was a very big lightning strike. I apologize if there's background noise there. But anyways, long story short, everyone has a different opinion. None of them follow the factory service manual exactly, so I'm not going to do that. I'm certainly not going to recommend that you all do that. I think you should sort of make your own decision there. What I'm going to do is make sure that my brakes work, that I don't have so much air in the system that they're too squishy to even work. If they are, then I'll do some bleeding, but I'm going to essentially drive it. Our Toyota service center is only a few blocks down the road. I'm going to drive it there and have them flush all the brakes out. One tip, if you do decide to flush the brakes yourself, the factory service manual isn't particularly clear on, is that if you are going and letting fluid out of the system, you need to periodically refill the reservoir. And you need to make sure that you turn the car off and pump the brakes 40 times to remove all of the pressure from the system before you fill up to that max fill line. Otherwise, if you fill up to the max fill line and then the pressure goes out, more fluid's going to go from that accumulator into the reservoir, and it's going to overflow on you. So, you know, follow whatever procedure you're comfortable with. Again, I'm not going to show anything that I'm really not comfortable with in terms of, you know, just being sure that it's the right procedure and safe. So best of luck with that process. And for me, this pretty much wraps up the video and the job. I will see if I can take that electric motor apart on my old brake booster, and you know, maybe I could show you or demonstrate why it you know, it can stop and start sporadically a little bit. So that'll be the end of the video today. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. All right, here is the old brake booster. I've taken the motor off, and I'm gonna open it to see if I can find out what went wrong. But just so you can see, if you do decide to only change out the motor and leave the unit on the car, you can do that pretty easily with just two 5mm Allen wrench bolts here and here on the pump housing, so under the accumulator. And then I found it helpful once I got those bolts out to sort of stick a screwdriver in this little nook and kind of pry it off. It was kind of stuck on there. But one thing you might want to check out if you're going to go the route of just replacing the motor is take a look at the contacts. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. That contact doesn't matter. But you know, this one is incredibly corroded, and actually these contacts are pretty well known for being corroded. So if you're gonna replace this, it'll come with a new wire and you know, a new kind of connector here. But if this receiver is so corroded that you're not going to be able to get a new set of wires to it, then that, you might have to go get a whole unit. So to check that, this would be like the driver's side of the car, and then this would be just under this black box. You'd probably have to get a little mirror down there to take a look at this and see what this looks like. But I'm not even sure if I had another motor that I'd be able to connect it to my original brake booster. So let me crack this thing open and we'll see what it looks like inside. All right, here is the inside of that motor. And I don't know what all these parts are called, but I generally know how the motor should work. So on either side you have these brushes, positive and a negative. You can see the wire kind of going into this spring contraption, which pushes a little metal contact brush up against this, I'm gonna call it a spindle. And if I pull on this wire, you can see that brush kind of come back and forth. So the brushes aren't totally worn down, they're still there, and they're there on both sides. And the way this is supposed to work is that that positive brush will make contact with one of these copper panels at a time. The negative will make contact with one on the opposite side, and then that kind of force will travel up through these wires into an electromagnet, which creates sort of an electromagnetic force to turn the motor to a different set of panels, and then the next set of panels transmit that to the next set of magnets that pull, and you get this kind of cycle that perpetuates. The issue is that those brushes or these panels can wear down, and you can see in this case some of these panels, like that one with the glare on it, have almost all of the copper worn down on them. So that explains the sort of sporadic nature of this failure, right? If the model lands such that that really worn down panel lands on the positive contact, when the motor stops, the motor starts back up, it might not have enough contact, or maybe have no contact, in which case it's not going to be able to get that motor spinning again. So maybe it is like it doesn't work until you turn the car off, and maybe on startup there's enough voltage to get it going sometimes, and it could just be in and out. So hopefully that explains the failure, and I think that's the nature of any electric motor. Those components will wear out over time. So yeah, this was a fun job. I appreciate you guys tuning in.